to start with, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. So I'm Matt Wuerffel. I'm one of the design leads on Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns.
So we'll jump right into the nitty-gritty here. So I got to play a little bit of PvE and PvP today. Mm-hmm. And one thing I was curious about is, so you all are going for not a, Final Fantasy or World of Warcraft type expansion where, all right, here's the expansion, all the gear dropping off chump mobs is now better than your 400-hour gear. Your way around that is sort of the mastery system. And so what I've seen of it is it's really cool. It's almost like sort of like a Metroid type thing where it's like you get your glider and then, you unlock like the mushroom hopping I saw. And I desperately was trying to find a way to unlock that. And I guess it's not in the demo I had, but I was like, I must jump on this. So could you talk a little bit about the decision to go with that feature and, how you're sort of approaching it, like, from a longevity standpoint? Because, a lot of it, too, looking at it from my perspective, I was like, this is really fun, but, when you leave, do your masteries carry over elsewhere? Like, I wouldn't imagine you could use the glider outside of the jungle. So how are you approaching that from, like, a longevity standpoint, and how is it designed? I guess that's sort of a broad question. But.
Yeah, definitely. It is something that we looked at and we kind of examined, like, what are the things that we want to do with the expansion, and we could raise the level cap, we could introduce new tiers of gear, and we just found that both of those solutions are not really in keeping with the Guild Wars 2 message overall and what our game is, which is, hey, you can jump into this and you can play awesome content from the beginning, and there's not some different version of the game that is waiting for you after you get through a bunch of grind and get all your gear together. And so the differences between tiers of gears in our game is reduced, and we don't want to add levels in this expansion because we think, hey, you can come in and you can play, and from the day that you buy Heart of Thorns and you jump into that map and you start playing, all of the progress that you've already made in the old world, it's not invalidated. Like, you can continue to go back there, you can play that content. The gear that you worked really hard to earn, like, that's awesome. You should be able to take that and use it.
Absolutely.
As we create new content. And then we also want to provide opportunities to build some of that Metroid style or Zelda style gameplay where when I go into the jungle region and I start playing through that map, I do find little things where I'm like, hey, there's jump mushrooms here. Like, I really want to get up onto that plateau and see what's up there. I'm going to invest in that mastery line and unlock that ability. You can come back to that map later and do it. You can invest in that first thing, and we can open up new ways of interacting with the game space and new ways of interacting in the content through the mastery system. And so in a lot of ways, it's kind of a contextual progression system. Hey, when you're in the jungle region, you find the things that are really exciting for you to do, and then we provide ways for you to get better or more efficient at those things. And there's also, you can see in the demo today too, there's mastery tracks for old Tyria as well. And so one of those that's in there is the fractal track, and one of those that's in there is for acquiring your legendary weapons. So providing that same framework of, hey, are you really engaged in fractal play? Like, here is a mastery line for you that will help you get more efficient and unlock some new ways of interacting with that content when you're specifically doing that stuff. Since it's account bound, it also kind of adheres to one of our other, I don't know that I'd call it a philosophy, but something that we examine every time we're building a system. We look at it and we say, does this need to be character bound, or does this need to be an account system? Like, some players have one main character that they spend all their time on, and some players have a ton of alts.
A bunch of alts,
yeah. And so we want to look at masteries from that perspective as well, and respect players' time and say, hey, when you invest in these mastery lines, they apply to all your characters. You can go into the jungle region, you can glide on all your characters once you've unlocked that.
Yeah, that's sort of exciting as a foundation and as, like, a basis for exploration too. Is it seems like, now you're going to be engaging with because what I find personally is, like, I've played a lot of GW2, I've played a very large amount of Final Fantasy 14, and what I find different about the traditional mold is that, after a while you're sort of not even paying attention to where you are. You're just like, all right, what am I clicking on? What am I doing?
Right.
Whereas with Guild Wars 2, it's very sort of, you're bound to your environment. And so this seems like a really good way to, like, I want to get up to that platform because I want to see what's up there. So I guess Masteries is sort of allowing you to explore that. And going forward, I would imagine with the Living World too, you'll be able to create new areas that have, like, different styles of traversal, I guess.
Yeah, so it definitely at this point we're talking just about expansion and not about what follows up with that.
Yeah.
But you can see that in the way that the story in Living World leads into the gameplay and expansion. Now we're creating a mastery system that is kind of region contextual, and so as we continue to add things to the game, we're definitely going to still support the live game and add updates to it. And so you'll see that we'll add more mastery points, and we might add additional mastery lines. And if we went to new regions, we would add mastery lines for those as well, so that you have. It provides us a way of saying, hey, here's a cool mechanic or way to interact with this region. Let's give players abilities that are specifically built to interact with that content and to give them new options and way of engaging with it.
Yeah, so you're sort of engaging, like you're engaging in a totally different way too, which is really cool. Like you could design an area and be like, this is the style of play we're going to have here.
Yep.
Very cool. And so I'm not sure if this is like too far out or anything, but in terms of masteries, how long would you imagine it would take someone to because you mentioned like as you go, you get further and further costs. Is this the type of thing that people will do their masteries and continue doing lots of other content, or like will you focus on your masteries and will that take up a significant number of hours of game time?
We're still in the kind of phase where we're figuring out like, hey, how do we balance these things and how much time do you need to take to invest in these lines? But the goal is definitely to say, hey, here's a list of really awesome abilities that you can get. Go and get mastery points by playing the game and playing the core content that we're building in the game and excelling at it. Spend those points in these lines, and then go play the game. And by playing the game, you unlock experience that goes into that line and eventually gains you that ability. So it is very much a focus on, hey, we've built a lot of cool core content in this game. Go play it to earn mastery points. Go seek out like really hidden little areas that you can only get to if you're really clever or if you're really good at something. Go complete story missions and go exploring in the open world and find locations where we put mastery points. Acquire them, invest them in a track that you're interested in. Set that track as active, and then play the game. And by playing the game, you're going to be earning progress towards those lines, and you'll eventually unlock those abilities. Very much in the same way that we approached a lot of our open world design, which was there's lots of different ways to engage with this game, and players will come up with super creative ways of doing it. And we don't want to say that, hey, you have to do it this way or in this order. We want to say, just go play the game and find what's fun for you. And we'll create a system that supports that and that takes you investing time in the game and converts it into now you have cool new ways to interact with it.
Cool. So can you talk at all about the scope of the jungle? Because I've heard it referenced as the jungle. Is the jungle several areas? Is the jungle one area? I guess compared to the vanilla game, how much actual physical space? Because I know that the jungle is more vertical.
Yeah, I can't give specifics on that stuff right now. I can say that we're focusing very much on verticality and making these maps really content-rich, repeatable experiences. And so in the same way that you look at Living World and kind of the way that Silver Waste or Dry Top works, and the map itself has a story and a gameplay mechanic, and doing any content on that map advances that. So that's moving forward in expansion. All of the maps have that same setup, that there is a story and a context and a gameplay specific to that map. All the content on the map helps support that. And then just in terms of vertical space, there's some crazy stuff in there, like jump off of some areas in the first map that we are showing in the demo, and you're falling for ludicrous amounts of time.
Yeah, I found one of those by mistake.
Yeah, there's just so much vertical space, and that opens up a lot of areas for us to play around with gliding and with how we move you through that space. So really excited to see it's an evolution of what we were doing with some of the Living World maps.
Interesting. So in terms of PvP, I got a chance to play Stronghold, which was painfully addictive. My team won, by the way, and I had the highest score. But so, can you talk a little bit about is PvP going to have separate progression now? Because I heard a little bit about guilds and a little bit about how PvP is going to be, Stronghold's going to be tying into like World vs. World and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about like the progression and say you have a player that just wants to play PvP? What is the experience going to be like for them? Thorns.
So I can't go into super detail there. I can say that masteries are the PvE side of progression, and World vs. World has ability lines, which are very similar to masteries, and that's the World vs. World progression portion. And PvP, we'll be talking more about this as time comes, but I can say that Stronghold is a new game type. It is not just that single map, and that's the one map where you go and you play this other offshoot. And you can see a lot of elements in Stronghold where different ways that players are interacting with that map allows your strategy to change and evolve. And so something that I can just say, hey, stay tuned, and we'll dive into some of those questions about PvP as we get further along, closer towards Heart of Thorns release.
Cool. And so with Stronghold, can you talk a little bit about like the inspiration behind the Stronghold system? Like for me, I got a strong almost like a MOBA vibe from the way you have your lanes and the archers and the door breakers. Mm-hmm. It seemed to have more on like a macro level, like a team strategy thing going on. Mm-hmm. So could you talk a little bit about how that was designed?
Okay. I can give you the general sense of, yes, it is something that we were looking at. Hey, how do we get some of that MOBA feel, and that you have NPCs that you can go and spend your supply on and start sending them down the lane, and that the enemy team has to manage both, hey, how do we stop the guys that you're generating and sending down the lane, and also how do we push our own lane, and that there's some elements of, we have the kind of a different setup overall of like, hey, it's the pirates. One team is the pirates, and they're kind of heavily themed around that, and the other team is very organized around, hey, it's a bunch of knights, and they're pushing through. And so, I can only really give you that general sense of, yes, we definitely wanted to capture some of the elements of the MOBA feel, but we wanted to make it our own take on that, and our own GW2 evolution of kind of where we already had. And then we wanted to provide a very accessible game mode that was also very different from our standard conquest like capture point.
Yeah.
And so there's elements of taking some of that, you're dealing with forces that are not just enemy players, but there are also AI-controlled opponents moving down those lanes. You have to make decisions and trade-offs between gathering supply and spending it to generate that threat, or actually pressing forward or defending. And so...
So for the Revenant, can you talk a little bit about the design of the Revenant? Because I got the lore reason, which is really cool, because I played a lot of GW1. I was like, I was channeling the hero's past. I'm like, I'm so down with that. And it seems like the Revenant has a lot of like rift or like mist type abilities and the big heavy weapons. So can you just talk a little bit about the Revenant?
Yeah. So when we looked at, hey, we want to add a new profession. What do we add? First of all, we look at, we have 2 heavy armors, and then we have 3 medium and 3 light. Almost as if there's one spot left for us to add a profession to. So we're definitely making a heavy armor class. And then we talk kind of high level about what archetypes do the other professions already cover, and what do we feel like is missing. Because you want to be able to have players come in and be able to grok, like when they see that icon or they see that image, like I understand at a very conceptual level what a warrior is, right? Like that's pretty easy to grok. When you have 8 professions already, it's finding the 9th spot in there is a little bit tricky. But we went with looking at hey, something that's very dark and physical and has some elements of magic and lots of movement in it. And so you have this kind of, you can see it in the visuals for the Revenant, like very much black and red, a lot of movement in the armor set itself, but it's still very clear that it's aggressive and heavy armor. So from there, we started spitballing a bunch of ideas back and forth about what kind of weapons, what is the profession mechanic, and how does it tie into the rich history of GW1 that we have to draw on, and are there elements of classes from GW1 that we want to pull forward into GW2. So that discussion was going on, and we kind of hit on this idea of someone that, hey, they essentially take what was the weapon swap for the left hand of your bar, and we move it to the right half of your bar, and we say, wouldn't it be crazy if you had 2 elites and you had 2 heal skills and you had 6 utilities available to you? Yeah, that would be crazy. That sounds really broken. Let's go with that.
Let's make that work.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was the first thing I noticed in PvP. I was like, wait a minute, I can switch to my healing ability.
Yeah, and then how do we make that work? So let's start with, that sounds crazy, awesome, and probably broken. Let's start there, let's get it in, let's start playing around with it, and then focus it in. And then tying those things into the legends and saying, we want to essentially create a package that's visually, you can quickly identify it, and you can see how all of those skills play together. And we had this idea of someone who's traveled through the mists and is channeling heroes of the past. And those heroes of the past tend to be archetypes. And so, legendary dwarf stance is like, that's Jalis. And for people that play GW1, that's awesome. And like, he actually has lines and he talks to you. Like your legend will talk to you and say things when you're using your abilities. If you don't know anything about GW1, you can still grok the idea of, there's a legendary dwarf guy. He's going to be about like protection and stone. And then Malix, which is the legendary demon form. Like demon, anguish, pain, suffering, like he's Condes. So we kind of looked at the legends in that vein and said, for people that don't know anything about GW1, what's the high level concept that they can grok onto? How do we put skills together that really capture that feel? And then we played around with a lot of stuff. It's a ton of iteration, pulling things on and off, changing the profession mechanic back and forth, adding resources, taking resources out, until we got something that we were really excited about, and that's what you see in the demo.
Yeah, well, one of the things I found so cool about him, well, 2 things actually, was the Golden Road ability, which was laying that down, and like I used it in PvP a lot, where I was trying to take the hero from the other team, and they're knocking me down. So I dropped the Golden Road, and I'm like, this is mine. It was really cool. And then like we did in the PvE, we fought the Wuerffel, and he kept flying away. And so I was like, I wonder if this chain thing will catch him, and it did. And I was like, wow, this is just it's so visceral, and it's very different from your traditional MMORPG where it's like, well, this is the boss's mechanic, he flies away. Yeah. So it definitely has that sort of like very aggressive tone to it, but I like that between the 2 sides of it, even there's that much variety where it's like, I am the stone, I'm not going to get knocked down, versus I'm going to yank this guy to me and beat the crap out of him. So this is more of a broad question. So going into Heart of Thorns, is there anything from the vanilla release that you are, and of course the Living World stuff, that you're specifically, like you set out, we want to improve on this, like anything you thought, maybe it was weak in the original that you wanted to work on, or anything specific to Heart of Thorns that you're like, this is specifically designed because we want to, shore up a weakness or something we see as a weakness?
Yeah. I mean, the honest answer is everything in Heart of Thorns is looking at the base game and saying, how do we improve this, and how do we make this more consistent with our overall pillar of every time I see a player, it's going to be a good experience. And how do we look at everything that we've done and look at conventions in the MMO genre and say, is that something that we need to do as well, or is that something where there's really a different solution for GW2? And so that's where the masteries progression lines come out of that. Not raising a level cap, not introducing a new tier of gear comes out of that same analysis of saying, look, this is our game and it's been really successful and we're really happy with it. How do we make it better? And what are the areas where this isn't there yet? Yes, we can make this experience more accessible. We can make this experience more tightly integrated with everything. And so we're not talking about guild halls right now, but guild halls is a great example of reimagining what we're doing there and looking at how do we integrate that into all the different systems in Heart of Thorns. The way that mastery lines interact with the maps themselves and the content that's being built there is another example of, you can see in the Living World releases, we started building maps that had kind of big stories that were going on and gameplay mechanics. And they had things like Zephyrite movement skills, and we really liked that, and we saw a really great response from players on that. How do we integrate that more fully into maps going forward in a way that is better messaged, that is more accessible, that can be used across multiple maps instead of just on one. And you see a lot of that stuff feed into the Masteries line.
Yeah.
So, you know, we looked at basically every system in the entire game, and we made a decision about kind of where it is and how are we going to support it going forward. What work do we need to get it to the place where the thing that is there is awesome and accessible and extensible. And once we have that, then we were ready to announce, hey, this is Heart of Thorns.
This is what we got.
And this is what we got.
Cool.
We're really excited about it. So.